The global balance of power is shifting, and India has emerged as an essential pillar of this transformation. In numerous sectors, from pharmaceuticals to healthcare, technology, engineering, and scientific innovation, Indian professionals and businesses are increasingly pivotal to the functioning of Western economies. Ironically, the West, which once viewed India as a developing country and relied on its resources primarily for labor and outsourcing, is now far more dependent on Indian brainpower for its survival and prosperity. This dependence underscores a critical truth. While India can thrive without Western support, the West, particularly the United States and its NATO allies, would struggle to maintain its dominance and growth without India's contributions. This essay delves deep into the reasons why the West is reliant on India across several sectors and highlights the consequences that the West might face if it were to lose access to Indian talent and innovations. The pharmaceutical industry, the backbone of global health. India is often referred to as the pharmacy of the world, and for good reason. It is the largest provider of generic medicines globally, supplying over 40% of generic drugs to the United States and approximately 25% to the United Kingdom. Indian pharmaceutical companies like Sun Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Reddy's and Cipla are some of the biggest suppliers of critical medications, particularly generic drugs, to Western countries. India's capability to produce high-quality medicines at lower costs makes it indispensable for the West's healthcare systems. The West's pharmaceutical giants, often driven by profit margins, depend heavily on Indian companies to keep drug prices affordable. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Indian manufacturers played a key role in producing vaccines and essential medicines for Western nations, highlighting how dependent these countries are on India's pharmaceutical capabilities. If India were to cut off its pharmaceutical supply, the West would face skyrocketing drug prices, severe shortages of life-saving medicines, and a public health crisis that could cripple its medical infrastructure. Moreover, Indian innovation in the biotechnology sector is growing as companies invest heavily in research and development to develop advanced drug formulations, biosimilars, and vaccines. The West, which often fails to match India's cost-effective production, risks falling behind without access to India's expertise and resources. Indian medical professionals, the lifeblood of Western healthcare. Indian doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals form a significant portion of the medical workforce in countries like the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. In the United States alone, Indian origin doctors represent nearly 10% of all practicing physicians, while in the United Kingdom, over 40% of the National Health Service's foreign-trained doctors are from India. These numbers only scratch the surface of how crucial Indian professionals are to Western healthcare systems. Western countries, plagued by aging populations and shortages of medical professionals, depend heavily on Indian talent to keep their healthcare systems functional. Indian medical professionals not only fill the gaps, but also lead in fields like surgery, research, and medical education. The irony here is stark. The West, which often claims superiority in healthcare innovation, cannot maintain its standards without relying on Indian talent. Without Indian doctors and healthcare workers, Western healthcare systems would collapse under the weight of an aging population, chronic illnesses, and the rising demand for medical services. If India were to pull its professionals back or restrict the flow of talent to the West, countries like the United States and the United Kingdom would face a healthcare crisis of unprecedented proportions, marked by longer wait times, fewer specialists, and a drastic decline in the quality of care. Indian engineers and IT professionals driving Western technology. India's dominance in the field of information technology and engineering is well established. From Silicon Valley to Europe's tech hubs, Indian engineers, programmers, and IT professionals have been the backbone of technological growth and innovation. Companies like Google, Microsoft, IBM, and countless others depend on Indian talent not just for labor, but for leadership and innovation. It's no secret that many of the top tech companies are led by Indian origin CEOs, such as Sundar Pichai at Google and Satya Nadella at Microsoft. These leaders, along with the millions of Indian engineers and IT professionals working in the United States and Europe, are not just employees, but the innovators driving the next generation of technological advancement. The West, despite its attempts to promote homegrown talent, has repeatedly failed to match the technical expertise and work ethic that Indian professionals bring to the table. In the event that India were to limit the migration of its engineers and tech professionals, Western tech industries would experience an immediate slowdown in innovation, software development, and technological progress. The brain drain from India to the West has long been the fuel powering the rapid growth of Western tech giants. Should this well dry up, the West's dominance in global tech would quickly erode. Scientific innovation. India's rising dominance. Indian scientists and researchers are making waves in multiple fields, from space exploration to medical research and physics. India's space program, ISRO, has achieved milestones that many Western countries struggle to match, often at a fraction of the cost. In 2014, India became the first country to reach Mars on its maiden attempt, a feat that no other nation had achieved. The success of such initiatives demonstrates India's growing prowess in scientific research and development, areas in which the West increasingly lags. Western reliance on Indian researchers extends beyond space and physics. In fields like biotechnology, renewable energy, and agriculture, Indian scientists are leading the way in developing cost-effective and scalable solutions. Western industries and governments often rely on partnerships with Indian research institutions to stay competitive. Without access to Indian innovation, the West's scientific and technological progress would stagnate, leaving it vulnerable to competitors like China and Russia. Education and innovation. Indian institutions on the rise. The traditional narrative has been that India sends its best minds to the West for education and work opportunities. However, this is rapidly changing as Indian institutions like the Indian Institutes of Technology, Indian Institutes of Management, and All India Institute of Medical Sciences gain global recognition for producing world-class talent. The West's reliance on Indian professionals is now being matched by its dependence on Indian education systems to produce top-tier engineers, doctors, and scientists. As India continues to invest in higher education and research, the flow of talent to the West will slow, and more Indian professionals will choose to stay home or work in emerging markets, further diminishing the West's access to Indian brainpower. The West's declining influence, a power shift in the making. As India rises on the global stage, the West, particularly the United States and its NATO allies, faces a decline in its influence. The traditional Western powers are grappling with internal political crises, economic stagnation, and a growing distrust of their leadership on the world stage. Meanwhile, India, with its young and educated population, robust economic growth, and increasing geopolitical influence, is poised to become one of the leading global powers. The West's dependence on Indian talent and resources reflects its broader decline. Western nations, particularly the United States, have engaged in military interventions and economic policies that have destabilized regions, worsened inequality, and led to global resentment. In contrast, India's approach to diplomacy, grounded in non-alignment and cooperation, is gaining favor in the global South and beyond. The West's arrogance in assuming its dominance would continue indefinitely is now being exposed. The reality is that without access to Indian brainpower, pharmaceuticals, and scientific innovation, the West's position as a global leader is unsustainable. In sectors where the West once held unchallenged superiority, it now finds itself increasingly reliant on India. The consequences of ignoring India's importance. The West's failure to recognize and appreciate its dependence on India could have dire consequences. If India were to shift its focus inward, prioritize its own development, or strengthen alliances with other global powers like China and Russia, the West would face a catastrophic decline in several key sectors. Without Indian pharmaceuticals, the healthcare systems of many Western countries would be crippled. Without Indian doctors and engineers, critical industries would face severe talent shortages. And without Indian scientists and researchers, innovation would grind to a halt. India's growing economic and political power gives it leverage that the West can no longer afford to ignore. The West's survival, both economically and socially, now hinges on its relationship with India. Conclusion: the West's dependence on Indian power. The narrative that India needs the West is outdated and inaccurate. In reality, the West is far more reliant on India across multiple critical sectors. From pharmaceuticals to healthcare, technology, and scientific innovation, Indian professionals and businesses are the driving force behind many of the West's successes. As India continues to rise, the West must come to terms with its growing dependence on Indian brainpower and resources. Without India, the West's decline would be swift and inevitable. India is no longer the developing country that the West once looked down upon. It is now a global powerhouse whose contributions are essential to the West's survival.